In Canada, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a conversation surrounding the housing market. It's become a national pastime of sorts to ruminate about how insane house prices have gotten, with some conversations holding a hint of glee about outsized equity, and other conversations holding a more despondent tone about how young people cannot afford to own homes in this country, nor their children. It's a problem that only got worse during the pandemic, pushing the dream of home ownership out of reach for many young people. This is Canadian Real Estate 2021. The surge, the impact, the vulnerability. I've been covering Canadian real estate here and there over the past few years with Yahoo Finance Canada, BNM Bloomberg, more recently with the Financial Post, and back at CTV News when I was working with Quibi, RIP Quibi. In fact, my first video on this channel was about Toronto real estate, so if you wanted to gander at my first cringy foray into YouTube, it's right there for you. Full disclosure, I live in Toronto, I don't own any property, and I'm part of that millennial demographic that's constantly complaining about high house prices, and I'd like to think for good reason. So with all that aside, let's dive deep into what's been a wild time for real estate. When the pandemic began in early 2020, it immediately had housing watchers asking, is this going to be the event that finally kills the Canadian real estate bull? At first, it seemed like it would be the housing crash of the century. Jobs were lost, the stock market crashed, and people were afraid to leave their homes, let alone go into another one for an open house. With these sentiments came predictions, like that of the Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation, which stated that housing prices could fall between 9 and 18% over the next 12 months. The organization also figured that 12% of mortgage holders chose to defer their payments. National home sales even took a dip in April amid shutdowns, which seemed like it would corroborate these predictions, though prices for detached houses didn't crash. Even Remax, a company that's usually pretty optimistic about real estate, said that house prices would either remain stable or see a single-digit correction at worst. This subdued forecast decline and some mean words exchanged on Twitter and in the media led to a fight between the then CMHC CEO Evan Siddall and pretty much the entire real estate industry. Everything seemed like it was pointing to a face-planting housing market. But that's not what ended up happening, with the Bank of Canada cutting the interest rate to record low levels to keep the borrowing environment pretty accommodative for struggling businesses, at the same time that Canadians were heading to the suburbs to find more space amid a work-from-home environment. Prices and home sales went in the opposite direction. Let's dig into those details.
Here comes the boy.
The resulting buyer frenzy in the housing market made a brief dip out of what many thought would be a housing crash and actually brought the average Canadian home price above $679,000 by June 2021. And if you think that's bad, it actually hit a peak of over $716,000 back in March. The surge was largely led by markets like Toronto and Vancouver, where the average prices notched further over $1 million, according to MLS data. And because it takes me so long to edit these videos, Toronto home prices broke records again and reached a new high of roughly $1.16 million in October. Whoopee. This put affordability out of reach for many Canadians for a few obvious reasons. First and foremost, the down payment. The Government of Canada website states that in order to qualify for a $1 million home, borrowers should have a 20% down payment equal to about $200,000. Rates.ca went further to outline that borrowers need an annual income of just over $175,000. Even if that income is split with a partner, each person would still have to make over $87,000. Research from Generation Squeeze found that it takes a typical young Canadian about 13 years to save for a 20% down payment for an average price home in Canada. That research was found back in 2019. I'm sure it's worse now. As an aside, Jen Squeeze broke it down even further in 2016, showing that saving for a down payment could take between 12 and 23 years depending on the market. This is compared to the approximate 5 years it took back in 1976. Low interest rates over the past couple of years consistently fed into this problem, making money cheap and letting people pile on houses who either couldn't afford or could only afford on the margins, or allowed people to buy multiple properties to rent out or put on Airbnb. And we all know how I feel about Airbnb. Then when interest rates hit the floor during the pandemic, people moved quickly on their plans to either buy a home for the first time or upgrade their homes from a smaller space or a condo. Homeowners who bought their houses in the 80s and 90s will be quick to tell you that despite today's high costs, they've had a pretty rough deal too, because the high interest rates made the mortgage carrying costs that much steeper. In general, sure, of course that was the case, but today we are seeing a wider divide between average incomes and average house prices than ever before. Erica Alini at Global News did a great job compiling and reporting on this data earlier this year, so I didn't have to scrape together for this video. Her reporting, based on data from CREA and Stats Canada, shows that in the 1980s it took about 3 times the average household income to buy the average house. Through the 90s and much of the 2000s, it floated between 3 and 4 times. Nowadays, it takes about 7 times the average household income to buy the average home in Canada. This is kicked up even further in markets like Toronto and Vancouver, where it takes 10 times and 11 times respectively. And I'm not trying to badger the average homeowner or boomer here, at least not too much anyway. Boomer parents, despite the equity that they've developed in their home, aren't particularly happy about these soaring house prices either. Just think about it. When their kids can't afford a home of their own in their own neighborhood market, then that means that they usually have to drive before they qualify. That means that their kids are pretty much in a completely different market. With the lack of affordable options in Toronto and Vancouver, young professionals have been moving to the outer rim of the GTA and GVA area, making commutes into the city, if that's where they work, an absolute bitch. But it also means longer drives for parents to see their kids and for grandparents to see their wee little grandkids. As Canadian economist Mike Moffat put in an amazing Twitter thread, don't underestimate the force of an angry grandma. You can find the rest of the Twitter thread that he posted on September 7th. I recommend giving the whole thing a read. Anywho, there are also cases where young people just up and left their provinces altogether to go over to places like the Atlantic provinces where houses were kind of cheaper. It caused house prices in places like Nova Scotia, PEI, and New Brunswick to soar as well, whether people were starting a new life, telecommuting to their work from another province, and in some cases for wealthier Canadians, just bought a recreational property for recreational purposes. These surging home prices also have impacts ranging from economic to mental health. If you think the housing crisis isn't your problem, you might be surprised. Let's dig into those details next. In Ontario, where housing costs have soared between 30 and 50% depending on the area, young residents are feeling hopeless about their situation. A survey by Right at Home Realty found that 51% of those surveyed feel that they may never be able to afford a home in their own neighborhood. In the Greater Toronto Area, this figure climbs to 55%. These rising house prices have left many younger Canadians just up and leaving the country altogether to head south or head to any other country where houses are more affordable, deciding that Canada is just not a place where they can make it work anymore. It's a trend that Pickering, Ontario-based real estate agent Michelle Makos has been pointing out on Twitter, saying that she's received story after story of young people, or the parents of these young people, have just been leaving the country to head to the US, where houses might just be more affordable. She put out a poll in May asking young professionals if they feel like they missed the market and are considering outright leaving their hometowns. Among just shy of 800 votes, the overwhelming majority said that yes, they were considering it. 81% of them, in fact, did. Tag this onto the nearly 7% that said they already left, you're looking at about 88% of young people leaving their home markets behind. Jesse Baines, a reporter at Yahoo Finance Canada and one of my former colleagues when I worked there, wrote an article about this back in June with some of Michelle's own comments when it comes to her own family. She said something that stuck out to me. Being in real estate, it just made me realize the one thing I love doing is the one thing that could cost me my daughter if she were to leave. God damn. I don't care if you're the most pull yourself up by the bootstraps, unsympathetic to the housing crisis kind of a person. That's a tough thing to hear. Can't imagine it was easy to say. Also, I certainly recommend giving Jesse's article a read. It gives you a good rundown of what to expect if you're one of these Canadians that's planning on moving to the US because of these reasons. It's also left a generation of young Canadians feeling lost and hopeless in their life planning. You don't need to go far on message boards to find a despondent young Canadian espousing their own experience. So there's emotional consequences involved, but there's also economic consequences, especially when young professionals and skilled workers find that they can't afford to live in places like Ontario and BC. Vancouver saw an outflow of 1,200 people to other provinces in the third quarter of 2018, a problem that could very well get worse amid these pandemic price surges. An Abacus Data and Aurea survey found that nearly half of surveyed young professionals were considering packing up their bags and heading out, according to reporting from Better Dwelling. This is the case among Canadians aged 18 to 29 in particular, with 45% looking to go to another province. With international employers starting to poach young talent in Canada, there's already one box checked for some people transitioning to life in another country. All of this is to say that there's a lot at stake here, and provinces have just been playing musical chairs with their young people. So, what is the federal government going to do about this? Well, we just had an election in the Great North, and let's see what we can expect. Spoiler alert, it's much of the same. Leading up to this year's election, federal party leaders had their own ideas of how to combat this growing housing crisis. This is what they had in mind. The Conservatives plan to attack the problem from a supply and speculative demand approach with pledges to create 1 million homes over the next 3 years, put a 2-year ban on foreign real estate investment, adjust the mortgage stress test to accommodate employees who are not full-time, encourage housing stability with 7 to 10-year mortgages, not tax the capital gains on the sale of a principal residence, among others. The NDP's platform looked to encourage more supply and get more Canadians in the market, pledging to create 500,000 affordable units within the next 10 years, reintroduce 30-year CMHC insured mortgages on entry-level homes, impose a 20% tax on homes purchased by foreign investors who aren't Canadian citizens and don't live in the country, double the homebuyer's tax credit to $1,500, take out the federal portion of the HST and GST construction costs for affordable homes, give struggling families up to $5,000 a year rental supports, among other measures. The Liberals were the last to release their own platform, but their flux of new measures included promises to construct or maintain 1.4 million homes over the next 4 years, including investing $4 billion in a housing accelerator fund to boost the annual housing supply in the largest cities and aim to create 100,000 new middle-class homes by 2025, place a ban on blind bidding to promote price transparency in the transaction process, brought in an upcoming vacant home tax to include foreign-owned vacant land in large cities, introduce a tax-free first home savings account allowing Canadians under 40 to save up to $40,000 towards their first home, double the first-time buyer's tax credit to $10,000, among other measures announced. This sounds like a large slew of new measures, but housing affordability advocates say that these measures just don't go far enough. It also raised the awkward elephant in the room that the only way to really make housing more affordable in their minds is to bring house prices down, which is a bridge too far for a lot of these federal leaders who are trying to also keep their homeowner voters happy. And I suppose that makes sense from a political strategy perspective, given that the majority of Canadians are homeowners. The Liberals won the election with minority government, so when it comes to actually dealing with this housing crisis, I guess we can expect more of the same. Damn. To be honest, I wasn't really expecting that much results to come out of the other parties either. Some of my readers also raised the question of how far would any of these federal policies really go, given that housing construction is more of a municipal or provincial jurisdiction. I believe there are some mechanisms that can be rolled out on the federal side, especially when it comes to tamping down speculative demand through some tax implications, but otherwise these are sort of just blunt tools that are trying to target a few problem markets but end up just being broadly swept across all of the markets across the country. It's really part of this overarching issue in the country with how we approach real estate is that we sort of treat the different Canadian markets like it's one monolithic beast that needs to be slayed. More supply is obviously part of the solution, but it is definitely more complicated than just a supply and demand dynamic. In fact, in September, RBC Economics released a report showing that Canada has never had as many housing units under construction as it had in the past 12 months, with nearly 320,000 units beginning construction. Assuming all goes well in the supply chain, then RBC economist Robert Hogue, and the author of the report, says that we could be seeing a lot of housing completions come online in the next year. Still, these units would have to make up for a lot of demand in the country, especially as Canadians are looking to start new families and the borders are starting to reopen after being shut down for so long during the pandemic, bringing in a wave of new immigrants that are going to need more housing. That said, if interest rates started rising, then I believe you would see the housing market make a bit more sense in a bit of a hurry. Not a full-fledged correction or anything, but not the face-ripping, double-digit price growth you've been seeing over the past couple of months here. However, there's also the concern of these homeowners who did buy at the margins and might not be able to shoulder the cost of their mortgage payments if rates were suddenly to rise. All of this is to say that we certainly have a housing crisis in this country. It's not anything new, but the pandemic has certainly kicked it up a gear. Anyway, let's just get to the end of this video. Turns out this topic is very depressing. I'm 26 years old now, and I'm part of the demographic that is going to have a huge amount of trouble owning their own home one day, if that dream ever even becomes a reality. Oh, and I did everything that the previous generation said were essential to home ownership one day. I've scrimped and saved in my early 20s, made sure I didn't live beyond my means, got into investing and saving, worked multiple jobs, all that jazz. And what I didn't get was a sizable wealth transfer from a wealthy relative. And that's the reality that many Canadians, I would say the majority of younger Canadians, are facing right now. This isn't a woe is me, this is merely a reality that many Canadians my age are facing right now. Canada has financialized housing and incentivized home ownership so much that it's kind of becoming rich that some people try to promote renting as a viable option nowadays. There's a few problems with that. First of all, we don't see enough rental options that are actually suitable to raising a family, if that's what Canadians my age are looking to do one day. We're seeing more bachelor to two-bedroom apartments that aren't really suitable for larger families. And all in all, that's the state of the Canadian real estate market in 2021. Turns out it's pandemic proof. Thanks for watching my video. I'm gonna go have a good cry. But not really. I'm not gonna go cry, but I am bummed. This sucks. If you want to cheer me up about not being able to afford a home one day, you can do me a big solid and like, comment, and subscribe. Even if you want to head to the comments section and say, cheer up Steph, or there, that will go a long way. That would be greatly appreciated. This is Stephanie Hughes, signing off.